In this lecture, you will learn what a neuron is and what makes up a neuron. You will also learn the functional and structural classifications of neurons. So let's get started. Neurons, also called nerve cells, are highly specialized to transmit messages from part of your body to another. Although neurons differ structurally from one another, they have many common features. All have a cell body, which contains the nucleus and is the metabolic center of the body, and one or more slender processes are extending from the cell body. The cell body is the metabolic center of the neuron. Its transparent nucleus contains a large nucleolus. The cytoplasm surrounding the nucleus contains the usual organelles except for centrioles. Remember, since they do not divide, they have no need for centrioles. The rough ER, called Nissl substance, and the neurofibrils, which help keep the cell's shape, are particularly abundant in the cell body. This is a structure of a typical motor neuron. As I've mentioned, the cell body contains the nucleus and a rather large nucleolus. The arm-like projections, or fibers, vary in length from microscopic to 3 to 4 feet. The longest ones in humans reach from the lumbar region of the spine to the great toe. Neuron processes that convey incoming messages toward the cell body are the dendrites, while those that generate nerve impulses away from the cell body are called axons. Neurons may have hundreds of branching dendrites depending on the neuron type, but each neuron usually only has one axon. An occasional axon gives off a collateral branch along its length, but all axons branch profusely at their terminal end, forming hundreds to thousands of axon terminals, which you can see in this figure. The axon terminals contain hundreds of tiny vesicles, or membranous sacs. They contain chemicals called neurotransmitters. As I have said, axons transmit nerve impulses away from the cell body. When these impulses reach the axon terminals, they stimulate the release of neurotransmitters into the extracellular space. Remember this. Each axon terminal is separated from the next neuron by a tiny gap called the synaptic cleft. Such a functional junction is called a synapse. A synapse is the junction between those two nerves. Although they are close, neurons never actually touch other neurons. Please remember. Most long nerve fibers are covered with a whitish fatty material called myelin, which has a waxy appearance. Myelin protects and insulates the fibers and increases the transmission rate of nerve impulses, meaning that nerves travel faster through a neuron that has myelin. These cells wrap themselves around the axon like a fruit roll-up, and because the myelin sheath is formed by many individual Schwann cells, it has gaps or indentions called nodes of Ranvier at regular intervals. In this figure, we see the relationship of the Schwann cells to the axons in the peripheral nervous system. Clusters of neuron cell bodies and collections of nerve fibers are called differently when they are in the central nervous system than when they're a part of the peripheral nervous system. For the most part, cell bodies are found in the central nervous system in clusters called nuclei. This is where most of the metabolic functions of a neuron take place. Small collections of cell bodies called ganglia are found in a few sites outside the CNS and in the PNS. Bundles of nerve fibers running through the CNS are called tracts, whereas in the PNS they are called nerves. The term white matter refers to a dense collection of myelinated fibers, and gray matter is a collection of mostly unmyelinated fibers and cell bodies. Neurons can be classified either according to how they function or according to their structure. Functional classification groups neurons according to the direction the nerve impulse is traveling relative to the CNS. On this basis, there are sensory, motor, and association neurons. Here you can see different types of sensory receptors. In Figure A, we see naked nerve endings for pain or temperature reception. In Figure B, we have Meissner's corpuscles for touch perception. In C, we see Pacinian corpuscles for deep pressure reception. Then in D, we see a muscle spindle or proprioceptor, which constantly advises our brain of our own movements. The third category of neuron is known as the interneurons or association neurons. They connect motor and sensory neurons in neural pathways. Like the motor neurons, their cell bodies are always located in the central nervous system. Here you can see the different neurons by function. Structural classification is based on the number of processes extending from the cell body. If there are several, the neuron is a multipolar neuron. Because all motor and association neurons are multipolar, this is the most common structural type. Neurons with two processes, an axon and a dendrite, are called bipolar neurons. Bipolar neurons are rare in adults, found only in some special sense organs, usually the eyes and nose, where they act in sensory processing as receptor cells. Unipolar neurons have a single process emerging from the cell body. These type of neurons can conduct impulses both toward and away from the cell body. Sensory neurons found in the peripheral nervous system ganglia are unipolar. Neurons have two major functional properties: irritability, which is the ability to respond to a stimuli and convert it into a nerve impulse, and conductivity, the ability to transmit the impulse to other neurons, muscles, or glands. We will consider these functional abilities in the next lecture. So what do I need to know about this particular lecture? First of all, how does a tract differ from a nerve? How does a ganglion differ from a nucleus? What part of a neuron conducts impulses toward the cell body, and what part of a neuron conducts it away? Which part releases neurotransmitters? And how about this? Which neuron would be myelinated? A neuron that is conducting a nerve impulse traveling at the rate of 1 meter per second? Or would it be a neuron that conducts at a rate of 40 meters per second? Ponder that question. And last but not least, what are the types of sensory receptors? So let's think about all this and move on to the next lecture.